The morning sun didn't rise on the Whitmore farm. It clawed its way over the horizon, painting the Montana landscape in a cruel golden light. It was the kind of light that didn't warm you. It exposed you. It showed you everything the tornado had taken in the night. Edith Lorraine stood in the ruined doorway of their farmhouse. Her hands, calloused from years of work, gripped the splintered frame like she was trying to hold the whole world together. But the world had already been torn apart. Out in the wheat field, the barn lay twisted like a child's forgotten toy. Her father's barn, the one he'd raised with his own two hands 20 years ago. It was their history, their pride, and now it was just wreckage. Her younger sister, Ines Marie, came to stand beside her. Her voice was thin, fragile against the vast, broken silence. Edith, we can't fix this alone. Inez was only 19. She had the fire of youth still burning in her, a belief that things could always be put right. But even she couldn't ignore the disaster sprawling before them. It had been 3 years since their parents were gone. First their mother to a fever that burned through the valley. Then their father to a grief so heavy it simply stopped his heart. The farm was the only thing they had left of them, and now it felt like even that was slipping away like dust through their fingers. Edith's jaw tightened. She was the older sister. She was the one who had to be strong. "We'll go to town," she said, her voice more resolute than she felt. "We'll find help. There has to be someone, some man willing to work for the little we can offer." She thought it was a simple plan, a desperate plan, but a simple one. She had no idea she was about to walk straight into a storm far more dangerous than the one that had shattered their home. Because the man she was about to meet wasn't just a drifter looking for work. He was a man with a secret so dark it could either save them or destroy everything they had left. The town of Copper Creek wasn't much more than a single dusty street, but that day Murphy's Cafe felt like the center of the world. The air inside was thick with the smell of coffee, bacon, and something else. Something sharp and dangerous. Tension. Two men were squared off near the bar, and the whole cafe had gone silent, watching. One man was tall, broad-shouldered, with skin weathered by the sun, and a stillness about him that was unnerving. He stood like a mountain, calm and unmoving. The other man was smaller, wiry, and his face was a knot of pure rage. "You cheated me, Marvin Earl," the smaller man spat, his voice cracking. "That poker game was rigged. You took everything I had." The tall man, Marvin Earl, didn't raise his voice. He didn't even seem to breathe. "Walk away, friend," he said, his voice low and steady. "There's no need for this." But the angry man wasn't listening. He was beyond reason. He swung a wild, clumsy punch. Marvin sidestepped it with an easy grace that didn't belong in a dusty cafe. It was the kind of move a dancer might make, or a professional fighter. The smaller man stumbled off balance. Marvin's return punch wasn't wild. It was precise, surgical. It landed with a sickening crack, and the smaller man crumpled to the floor like a sack of grain. Just then, the door swung open and Sheriff Rawlings filled the frame. His eyes scanned the scene, landing on the tall stranger standing over the unconscious man. "Well, well, Marvin," the sheriff sighed, like this was a conversation he'd had 100 times. "Should have known you'd find your way into trouble sooner or later." Marvin Earl didn't flinch. "Wasn't looking for it, Sheriff. Man took a swing. I was just defending myself." "That's what they all say," Rawlings grumbled, pulling out a pair of iron shackles. "Disturbing the peace. Public fighting. You know the drill." As the sheriff snapped the cuffs around Marvin's wrists, Edith felt a strange pull. This wasn't right. The man had been attacked. But what struck her more was the look in Marvin's eyes as he was led away. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was resignation. Like he'd been expecting this all along. And that's when Edith started to wonder, who was this Marvin Earl? And what kind of trouble was he really in? It was a question that would soon turn her entire world upside down. The courthouse was small and smelled of old paper and stale justice. Judge Morrison, a man whose face looked like it was carved from granite, peered down at the stranger standing before him. "Marvin Earl, is it?" the judge grunted. "The charge is public fighting. The fine is $25, or 2 weeks in the county jail." Marvin's broad shoulders sagged just a little. It was the first sign of weakness Edith had seen from him. Don't have $25, Your Honor. Then it's 2 weeks breaking rocks for the county, the judge said, his gavel hovering, ready to fall. And in that moment, something inside Edith snapped. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the memory of her father, who always said you could see the measure of a man in a crisis. Or maybe it was just a gut feeling, a wild, inexplicable instinct. She stood up, her voice clear and steady, cut through the musty air. Your Honor, if I may? Every head in the courthouse turned to look at her. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. Miss Whitmore, what can I do for you? My sister and our farm was hit by the tornado, she said, her voice gaining strength. Our barn is gone. We need help rebuilding. Honest, hard work. If this man is willing to work, perhaps he could work off his debt to the county by helping us, instead of just sitting in a cell. A murmur went through the small gallery. It was an unusual proposal, a crazy one, entrusting two young women and their farm to a man who just knocked another man unconscious. Judge Morrison leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. He stroked his chin, his eyes darting from Edith's determined face to Marvin's stoic one. What do you say, Mr. Earl? The judge asked, a strange glint in his eye. 2 weeks of hard labor on the Whitmore farm, or 2 weeks breaking rocks in my jail? Marvin Earl turned his head. His gaze met Edith's across the courtroom. His eyes were the color of a stormy sky, and for a long moment, the world seemed to stop. It felt like he was looking right through her, seeing all the desperation and the fear and the tiny flicker of hope she was clinging to. Something unspoken passed between them. A recognition. Two people cornered by life, standing on the edge of a cliff. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. I'll take the farm work, Your Honor, he said, his voice resonating through the silent room. And I'm grateful for the chance. Edith let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She'd done it. She'd found her help. But as she watched Sheriff Rawlings unlock Marvin's cuffs, a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. The look the sheriff gave Marvin wasn't just professional disapproval. It was something else. A look of deep, personal suspicion. It was a look that said, I know who you are, and I'm watching you. The wagon ride back to the farm was heavy with a silence that felt louder than any storm. Marvin Earl sat in the back with the supplies, his only possessions a small, worn canvas bag. He hadn't said a word since leaving the courthouse. Edith kept glancing at him in the reflection of a water bucket, trying to read the man she'd just tied her family's fate to. But his face was a mask, impossible to decipher. You can sleep in the loft of the old tool shed, Edith said as they pulled up to the devastated homestead. It's the only structure still standing besides the house. Work starts at sunrise. Marvin swung himself down from the wagon, his movements fluid and powerful. He looked at the wreckage of the barn, then back at her. His stormy eyes were serious. I'll earn my keep, Miss Whitmore. You have my word on that. Edith felt a bitterness rise in her throat, sharp and familiar. Words come easy, she replied, her tone colder than she intended. It's the keeping of them that separates the men from the boys. She was thinking of Wendell Claude. 5 years ago, he'd whispered 1,000 beautiful words to her, promises of marriage, of a future, of a life filled with adventure. Then he'd left for the California goldfields, promising to return a rich man. 5 years. 5 years of waiting, of hoping, and then finally the slow, painful death of a dream. Wendell had taught her that a man's promises were worth about as much as the breath they were spoken on. That first week, Edith watched Marvin like a hawk. Every move he made, every swing of the hammer, she was there, expecting him to be lazy or clumsy or to just disappear in the night. But he was none of those things. Watching him work was astonishing. He didn't just clear wreckage. He sorted it. He salvaged every usable piece of lumber, every nail that could be straightened. His hands, which she'd seen deliver such a precise, brutal punch, moved with the confidence and skill of a master craftsman. He wasn't just a farmhand. He knew things. He understood angles and weight distribution and the logic of construction. He worked from the moment the sun rose until long after it had set. stopping only for the meals Inez brought him. He was quiet, tireless, and devastatingly efficient. One evening, Inez came to Edith as they washed the dinner dishes. "He's not what I expected," she said, her young face full of confusion. He's, well, he's incredible. The way he's framing the new foundation, Papa would have been impressed." Edith scrubbed at a plate, her knuckles white. "Remember what Papa used to say," she murmured. "Judge a man by the sweat on his brow and the quality of his work." But she couldn't trust that anymore. She'd learned to distrust her father's simple, optimistic view of the world. A man could be a good worker and still be a liar. A man could build a barn with his hands and break a heart with his words. On the seventh day, Sheriff Rawlings rode out to the farm. It wasn't a friendly visit. He dismounted, his eyes sweeping over the progress Marvin had made, a cynical sneer on his face. "Just checking in on the county's ward," he said, his gaze fixed on Marvin, who had stopped his work and was now standing perfectly still, watching the lawman approach. "He's working hard, Sheriff," Edith said, stepping between them. Rawlings ignored her. He walked right up to Marvin, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "I've been doing some checking on you, Marvin Earl. Funny thing, the name doesn't seem to exist before a year ago. It's almost like you just appeared out of thin air." Marvin didn't say a word. He just stood there, a statue of a man. The sheriff leaned in closer. "A man doesn't appear from nowhere unless he's running from something. So I'll ask you one time, and you better give me the right answer. Who are you running from?" The air crackled. Edith felt her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment the truth would come out. The moment she would find out just what kind of man she'd brought to her home. Marvin met the sheriff's gaze, and for the first time, Edith saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was a deep, bone-weary sadness. "You're right, Sheriff," Marvin said, his voice quiet but clear. "Marvin Earl isn't my real name." He took a breath. "My name is Jacob, and I'm not running from someone. I'm running from something I did." The sheriff's eyes narrowed to slits. "And what exactly did you do, Jacob?" Jacob's gaze shifted, for just a second, to the half-rebuilt barn frame, a structure of hope rising from the ruins. Then he looked back at the sheriff, his expression unreadable. "I killed a man," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold as a tombstone. Edith felt the blood drain from her face. Inez let out a small, terrified gasp behind her. Killed a man. She had brought a killer to their home, a man who admitted it, right in front of the sheriff. Sheriff Rawlings didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied, like he'd finally found the missing piece of a puzzle he'd been working on for a long time. "I knew it," Rawlings breathed, a grim smile touching his lips. "I knew you were more than just some two-bit brawler. Who was he? Why'd you do it?" Jacob's jaw was a hard line. "He was my partner, my friend, and he betrayed me. He tried to take everything we'd built. There was a fight. It went wrong." "It always goes wrong," the sheriff said, his hand drifting down to rest on the butt of his pistol. "Where did this happen? When?" 3 years ago, in the Colorado mining camps," Jacob answered, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "His name was Silas, and I've regretted it every day since." Edith's mind was reeling. A killer. She was standing 10 feet from a man who had taken another man's life. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to tell the sheriff to lock him up and throw away the key. But something held her back. The way he said it. The profound sadness in his eyes that seemed to go deeper than just regret. It felt like a wound that would never heal. "So you ran," Rawlings pressed, "took a new name, drifted from town to town, hoping no one would ever find out." "I ran because I panicked," Jacob said, "but I'm not running anymore. I told the judge I'd work for 2 weeks. I intend to keep my word. After that, I'll go with you, Sheriff. I won't cause any trouble." Rawlings studied him for a long, tense moment. Edith held her breath. This was it. He was going to arrest him, take him away, and they'd be right back where they started, alone, with a ruined farm. But then the sheriff did something completely unexpected. He laughed, a short, harsh, humorless sound. "You think it's that simple?" Rawlings said, shaking his head. You think you can just confess to me, and I'll wait patiently for 2 weeks to clap you in irons? That's not how this works, son. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Jacob and Edith could hear. Here's how it works. I've got a telegraph about a man matching your description. Wanted for the murder of a federal land surveyor named Silas Croft in Colorado. That's a federal crime. That means a hanging judge and a short rope. Federal land surveyor. Not just a mining partner. The story was changing, getting darker, more complicated with every word. But, the sheriff continued, a cunning light in his eyes, the telegraph is unofficial. A private inquiry from a wealthy associate of Mr. Croft's. No official warrant has been issued, yet, which means, for now, you're my secret to keep. Jacob's eyes narrowed. What do you want, Sheriff? Simple, Rawlings said, his gaze flicking to the sisters and the farm. You're going to stay right here. You're going to finish this barn. You're going to work for these ladies until I say you're done. And you're going to be the most model citizen this county has ever seen. Because the moment you step out of line, the moment you even think about leaving, I send a wire back to Colorado, and the U.S. Marshals will be here before you can saddle a horse. Do we have an understanding? It wasn't an offer. It was a threat. It was blackmail. The sheriff wasn't just a lawman. He was using Jacob. Using them. But why? What did he gain by keeping a confessed killer on the Whitmore farm? Jacob looked at Edith, his face a mask of stone. He gave a single, sharp nod. We have an understanding. As Sheriff Rawlings mounted his horse and rode away, Edith was left with a terrifying new reality. She wasn't just sheltering a drifter. She was harboring a fugitive murderer, a man who was now a pawn in some strange game being played by the local sheriff. Her simple plan to find help had just become a conspiracy, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The sheriff's revelation changed everything. The air on the farm grew thick with unspoken words and watchful eyes. Edith found herself studying Jacob, this man who was no longer Marvin, searching for the killer within him. But all she saw was the same quiet, relentless worker he'd been before. He still rose before the sun. He still worked with that same impossible skill. If anything, he worked harder now, as if trying to build a wall of labor and sweat between himself and the past that was hunting him. Inez was terrified. She avoided him completely, leaving his meals on a stump near the barn and scurrying back to the house. How can you let him stay, Edith? She whispered one night, her eyes wide in the lamplight. He killed a man. He said so himself. And the sheriff is letting him stay, Edith countered, though her own heart was a tangled mess of fear and confusion. There's more to this story, Inez. I can feel it. Why would Rawlings want him here? Why not just arrest him? That was the question that haunted her. The sheriff was a hard man, not a sentimental one. There was a reason, a logic to his actions that she couldn't yet see. It was like watching a chess game where all the pieces were hidden. A few days later, another storm rolled in. Not a tornado this time, but a furious thunderstorm that turned the sky black and unleashed a torrent of rain. Wind howled across the plains, tearing at the new framework of the barn. Edith watched from the kitchen window as the timbers swayed violently. A large, crucial support beam at the peak of the roof began to pull loose. If it went, the whole structure could collapse, undoing weeks of backbreaking work. Suddenly, she saw a figure emerge from the tool shed, head bent against the driving rain. It was Jacob. He was heading for the barn, for the ladder. No, she breathed. She threw open the door and ran out into the deluge, the wind trying to rip the words from her mouth. Jacob, get back here. It's not worth it. Get down. He didn't listen. Or maybe he couldn't hear her over the roar of the storm. She watched in horror as he scrambled up the slick ladder and onto the treacherous roof. He moved across the beams like a cat, the wind threatening to peel him off and throw him to the ground at any moment. Lightning split the sky, illuminating him in a terrifying, ghostly white light. He was a man fighting a god, wrestling with a wooden beam as the heavens tried to tear it from his hands. He fought, and he won. With a final, desperate heave, he secured the timber, hammering it into place with furious blows. The frame shuddered, then held. When he finally climbed down, soaked and shivering, Edith pulled him into the relative shelter of the tool shed. As she lit a lantern, the flickering light fell across his face and arms. He was bleeding. A long, deep gash ran along his forearm, and a cut above his eye was trickling blood down his temple. "You're a fool," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and relief. "It needed to be done," he said simply, his teeth chattering from the cold. She went to the house and came back with bandages and whiskey for disinfectant. As she cleaned his wounds by the dim lamplight, her fingers brushed against his skin. His hands, she noticed again, were a road map of old scars and calluses. But they weren't the clumsy, thick hands of a simple brawler. They were the hands of a builder, a creator. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper above the drumming rain. "Risking your life for a barn that isn't even yours." He was silent for a long time, watching her face in the lantern light. "Running is easy," he finally said. "Any coward can run. I've run from enough things in my life. I figured it was time to stop running and start building something instead, even if it isn't mine." His gaze was intense, and it held a world of pain. "That man in Colorado, Silas, we were supposed to build things together, an architectural firm. We had designs, plans. We were going to build new kinds of buildings for a new kind of country. He was brilliant, and he was my best friend." He paused, swallowing hard. "But he had a weakness for gambling, for easy money. He got in deep with some very dangerous people. He sold our designs, our patents, everything, to a man who wanted to ruin us and take our ideas for himself. When I confronted him, he pulled a gun on me, Edith. He was desperate. We struggled. The gun went off." He looked down at his own hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And the man he sold out to, he had the law in his pocket. He made it look like cold-blooded murder. So I ran." Something inside Edith's carefully guarded heart cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked like ice beginning to thaw after a long, bitter winter. His story felt true. It resonated with the man she saw every day, the builder, not the destroyer. She finished tying the bandage around his arm, her touch lingering for a second too long. "And the man he sold out to?" she asked. "Do you know his name?" Jacob's eyes turned cold as steel. "I know his name," he said, his voice a low growl. "He's a man who takes what isn't his, a man who builds his fortune on the ruins of other people's dreams." He looked her straight in the eye. "His name is Wendell Claude." The name hit Edith like a physical blow. Wendell, her Wendell, the man who had promised her a future, the man who had ridden away to the goldfields to make his fortune. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A different Wendell Claude. It had to be. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. That's not possible." Jacob's expression was grim. "He's from this part of Montana, isn't he? Talked about it all the time. A charming man with a silver tongue and a heart full of ambition. Said he left a girl behind. Promised he'd come back for her when he was rich." Every word was a nail hammering into the coffin of her old dreams. It was him. The man who had broken her heart was also the man who had destroyed Jacob's life. The two darkest storms of her existence were not separate tempests. They were the same hurricane, and it had a name: Wendell Claude. This changed everything. The sheriff's strange behavior suddenly clicked into place. Wendell was rich, powerful, the wealthy associate Rawlings had mentioned. Of course, Wendell had hired the sheriff to hunt Jacob down, not to bring him to justice, but to silence him. And Rawlings, instead of doing his job, was playing both sides. He was holding Jacob here, a prisoner on their farm, as a bargaining chip. He was waiting to see which side would offer him more. Edith felt sick. Her home had become a cage. Jacob wasn't just a fugitive. He was a witness to Wendell's crimes, and she and Inez were his unwitting jailers. "He knows you're here," she said, the realization dawning on her. "Wendell, the fight in town wasn't random. That man he sent picked a fight with you on purpose, to get you arrested, to put you under the sheriff's control." Jacob nodded slowly. "I figured as much. It was all a setup. Wendell doesn't want me brought to trial. A trial means I get to talk. I get to tell my side of the story. No, Wendell wants me buried, quietly." The rain hammered against the shed roof, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Inside, the silence was thick with the weight of this new, terrifying truth. The man she once thought she loved was a monster, a thief and a manipulator who had left a trail of ruined lives in his wake. And now he was coming. She knew it with a certainty that chilled her to the bone. Wendell had never forgotten her, but it wasn't love that would bring him back to Copper Creek. It was unfinished business. He was coming back to claim what he believed was his, and he was coming back to silence the one man who could expose him. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, the question directed as much to herself as to him. Jacob looked at the newly repaired barn frame, standing strong against the storm. "We do what we've been doing," he said, his voice regaining its steady resolve. "We keep building. We make this place so strong that no storm can tear it down." His eyes met hers, and in their depths, she saw not a killer, but a fighter, a survivor, just like her. "He's not going to win, Edith," Jacob promised. "Not this time." In that moment, under the flickering lantern light with the storm raging outside, Edith made a choice. She was no longer just his employer or his jailer. She was his ally. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was hers too. The revelation about Wendell Claude settled over the farm like a shroud. The work continued, but now it had a new feverish intensity. Every nail hammered, every board set in place, felt like an act of defiance. They weren't just rebuilding a barn. They were fortifying a position, preparing for a siege. Edith found herself working alongside Jacob, handing him tools, learning the rhythm of his labor. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now mingled with a fierce, burning anger. She told Inez everything. The younger sister's fear quickly turned to a protective fury. The farm wasn't just their home, it was their legacy, and they would not let a man like Wendell Claude taint it. Inez, who had once scurried away from Jacob, now brought him his meals with a look of quiet solidarity. The three of them had become a silent, tight-knit unit, bound by a secret that could get them all killed. They began to prepare. Jacob showed Edith and Inez how to properly clean and load their father's old hunting rifle. He walked the perimeter of the farm every morning and every evening, checking for anything out of place. He wasn't just a builder anymore. He was a guardian. One afternoon, a week after the storm, Edith rode into town for supplies. The atmosphere in Copper Creek had changed. People who had known her whole life now looked at her with suspicion. Whispers followed her down the street. It was clear that rumors were spreading. Rumors about the strange man working at the Whitmore farm. Rumors likely started by Sheriff Rawlings himself, testing the waters, manipulating public opinion. As she was loading flour into her wagon, a man stepped out of the shadows of the general store's awning. He was impeccably dressed in a fine city suit, his boots polished to a mirror shine. For a heart-stopping second, she thought it was Wendell, but it wasn't. This man was older, with cold, reptilian eyes. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice smooth as oiled silk. "My name is Mr. Thorne. I'm a business associate of a Mr. Wendell Claude. Perhaps you remember him." Edith's hand tightened on a sack of beans. "I remember him." "Good," Thorne said with a thin smile. "Mr. Claude has done very well for himself in California." "Very well indeed. He owns a great deal of property, mines, shipping interests, and he's always looking to expand. He heard about your recent misfortune. With the tornado, he has authorized me to make you a very generous offer for your land." He named a price. It was a staggering amount of money. More than the farm would be worth in 100 years. Enough for her and Inez to leave Montana forever, to live a life of ease and comfort. It was the dream Wendell had once promised her. "Why?" Edith asked, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "Why does he want this land so badly?" Thorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say Mr. Claude has a fondness for his home state and a desire to tidy up loose ends." The threat was unspoken, but crystal clear. This wasn't a business transaction. It was an eviction notice. "The farm is not for sale," Edith said, her voice like ice. Thorne's smile vanished. "That would be a mistake, Miss Whitmore. Mr. Claude is a man who gets what he wants. He can be a very generous friend or a very powerful enemy. You have a known fugitive, a murderer, living on your property. Sheriff Rawlings can only protect you for so long. Eventually, he'll have to do his duty. Imagine the scandal. Two young women harboring a killer. The town would turn on you. The bank would foreclose. You'd lose everything anyway. He was laying out the trap, showing her all the sharp steel teeth. Think about the offer, Thorne said, tipping his hat. I'll be at the hotel in town for 3 days. I suggest you make the wise choice. He melted back into the shadows, leaving Edith trembling with rage. She finished her shopping in a daze and urged the horses homeward, her mind racing. Wendell wasn't just coming for Jacob. He was coming for the farm. He wanted to erase not just his past crimes, but his entire history here. He wanted to own the land where Edith had rejected him, to plow her memory under and build something of his own on top of it. When she got back and told Jacob and Inez what had happened, the gravity of their situation settled in. They were trapped. If they refused to sell, Wendell would use the law, public opinion, and financial pressure to crush them. If they took the money, they'd be letting him win. They'd be selling their home, their parents' legacy, for blood money. That night, no one slept. The barn stood half-finished, a monument to a future that might never arrive. The next morning, as the sun rose, Jacob came to Edith with a look of grim determination on his face. There might be another way, he said. Silas, my partner. Before he died, he knew Wendell was going to betray us. He was scared. He told me he kept a ledger, a secret book where he detailed all of Wendell's illegal dealings. The land grabs, the false claims, the men he bribed. He told me he hid it somewhere safe, somewhere no one would ever think to look. Edith's heart leaped with a desperate hope. Where? Jacob's eyes scanned the wreckage that still littered the edges of their property. He never told me exactly. He just said he gave it to the most honest man he knew, for safekeeping, a man who lived near Copper Creek. A memory sparked in Edith's mind, a memory of her father, sitting at the kitchen table late one night with a troubled stranger. A man passing through looking for work. Her father had given him a meal and a place to sleep in the barn. They had talked for hours. She'd been just a girl, but she remembered the stranger's desperate eyes. She looked at Jacob. My father. Jacob's eyes widened. Your father? Are you sure? He used to do that, Edith said, the memory becoming clearer. He'd take in men who were down on their luck. He'd say that you could trust a man who had lost everything because he knew the value of what was left. It made a crazy kind of sense. Silas, on the run and paranoid, would have sought out someone completely removed from his world, a simple, honest farmer. If it's here, Jacob said, his voice filled with a new urgency, it would be proof, enough to clear my name and put Wendell away for good. Suddenly, the farm wasn't just a home. It was a treasure chest. And somewhere, buried under the rubble or hidden in the walls of the old house, was the key to their salvation. The search began immediately. It was a race against time. They had 2 days before Thorne's deadline expired. They scoured the farmhouse first, from the dusty attic to the stone-lined cellar. They tapped on walls, lifted floorboards, and sifted through every one of her father's old account books and letters, looking for any clue, any mention of a hidden ledger. Inez, with her sharp eyes, took the lead, her youthful energy now focused on this single desperate task. As they worked, Edith found herself looking at the familiar objects of her life in a new way. The house wasn't just a collection of memories anymore. It was a puzzle. Her father, a man she thought she knew completely, now seemed to have a secret life. He had been a keeper of secrets, a quiet player in a dangerous game she never knew existed. Meanwhile, Jacob concentrated on the wreckage of the barn. He moved with a methodical precision, sifting through the debris, examining every splintered beam and broken crate. He wasn't just looking for a book. He was thinking like a man trying to hide something. Where would a desperate man put the most important object in his life? Not somewhere obvious, somewhere clever, somewhere that used the farm itself as a hiding place. The first day passed in a cloud of dust and frustration. They found nothing. The weight of Thorne's deadline pressed down on them. That night, as they ate a silent, exhausted dinner, the feeling of hopelessness was a palpable thing in the room. The next morning, Jacob was standing by the old stone well when Edith came out. He was staring down into its dark, circular mouth. When you build something, he said, not looking at her, you always start with the foundation, The strongest part, the part that everything else depends on. He looked at her, his eyes intense. Your father built that barn to last 100 years. What's the one part of it the tornado couldn't touch? Edith followed his gaze, not to the wreckage but to the foundation, the heavy granite foundation stones that her father had hauled from the creek bed himself. They were massive, immovable, a testament to his strength and foresight. The cornerstone, she whispered. Every significant building had one, a ceremonial first stone, laid at the corner of the foundation. It was a tradition her father, a man who respected the old ways, would have certainly followed. They rushed to the ruins. In the northeast corner of the barn's foundation, half buried in dirt and debris, was a single, large granite block, slightly different from the others. It was smoother, more perfectly square. Jacob ran his hands over its surface, then grabbed a crowbar. It took all of his strength, with Edith and Inez helping, to pry the massive stone from its place. Beneath it was a hollow space, and nestled inside that hollow, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp, was a small leather-bound ledger. Their hearts pounded as Jacob lifted it out. His hands trembled slightly as he untied the leather thong and opened the cover. The pages were filled with a neat, precise script. Names, dates, figures. It was Silas Croft's secret diary of a crime. It detailed every illegal transaction, every bribe, every threat Wendell Claude had made to build his empire. It was the truth. It was their weapon. But as they stood there, clutching their victory, a shadow fell over them. They looked up. Sheriff Rawlings was sitting on his horse not 20 feet away, a shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. He wasn't smiling. Well now, the sheriff said, his voice cold as a winter morning. Looks like you found something. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Thorne's offer must not have been good enough. He swung down from his horse, the shotgun never leaving their direction. I'll be taking that book now. The crowbar was still in Jacob's hand. He took a half step forward, placing himself in front of Edith and the ledger. This doesn't have to go this way, Rawlings. This book is proof. It can put a criminal behind bars. The sheriff laughed, a dry, rattling sound. You still don't get it, do you? I don't want him behind bars. A man like Wendell Claude is much more valuable out here. He's predictable. He's greedy. He's an asset you can manage. You, he said, nodding at Jacob. You're a loose cannon, a moral man. You're much more dangerous to the way I like to do business. The truth was finally laid bare. Rawlings wasn't just corrupt. He was an architect of this whole situation. He hadn't been playing both sides. He'd been working for Wendell all along. He'd kept Jacob here on the farm, away from federal marshals, to give Wendell time to maneuver, to buy the land and the evidence with it. The search was never meant to succeed. He was just waiting for them to find the ledger for him. Give me the book, son, Rawlings said, leveling the shotgun at Jacob's chest. Don't be a fool. There's no way out of this for you. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. He's right, Jacob. Give him the book. Everyone turned. Standing at the edge of the woods, not 50 yards away, was Wendell Claude. He looked just as Edith remembered, only harder, colder. He was flanked by Mr. Thorne and two other men, rough-looking types with pistols holstered at their hips. Wendell's eyes landed on Edith, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Hello, Edith. I told you I'd come back for you. It's a shame it has to be this way. He looked past her, at the farm, at the half-built barn, his expression one of pure contempt. I'm offering you one last chance. Give us the ledger, sign over the deed to the farm, and you and your sister can walk away with more money than you've ever dreamed of. Refuse, and Sheriff Rawlings here will be forced to arrest a known fugitive. There will be a struggle. Shots will be fired. It would be a terrible tragedy. The trap had sprung. They were surrounded, outgunned. Hope, which had soared so high just moments before, came crashing down to earth. This was the end of the line. Jacob clutched the ledger to his chest. He looked at Edith, his eyes full of a terrible apology. He had brought this danger to her door. But as Edith looked at Wendell's smug, triumphant face, something inside her shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it was consumed by a white-hot rage. He was not going to take her home. He was not going to win. She looked at Inez, who was standing pale but resolute, her hand clutching a small, heavy rock. She looked at the barn, their monument of defiance. She looked at Jacob, the man who had shown her what true honor looked like. Then she looked back at Wendell. "You're offering us your dream, Wendell," she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "But it's not ours. It never was." She took a deep breath, and she screamed. A signal. And from the loft of the half-built barn, something moved. Wendell and his men were so focused on the confrontation in front of them, they never thought to look up. From the high shadows of the barn loft, a figure emerged. It was Otis Wayne, the tough old cattle rancher from the next property over, and with him were three of his farmhands. All of them were holding rifles. When Edith had ridden to town the day before, she hadn't just bought supplies. She had taken a risk. She had gone to see Mr. Wayne, a man her father had always respected. She'd told him everything. The fugitive, the blackmail, the ruthless tycoon trying to steal their land. She'd gambled on the hope that her father's good name and the bonds of community were stronger than Wendell Claude's money. Otis Wayne spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Rawlings," he called out, his voice a gravelly boom. "You're a disgrace to that badge. You and this city trash best be lowering your weapons." Rawlings froze, his face a mask of shock and fury. He was caught. Wendell's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a snarl of disbelief. They had been outmaneuvered. "This doesn't concern you, Wayne," Wendell shouted, his voice tight with panic. "A man threatening the daughters of my friend, John Whitmore? On their own land?" Otis replied, cocking his rifle with a deafening click. "That damn well concerns me." Suddenly the odds had changed. It wasn't four armed men against two women and a fugitive anymore. It was a standoff. Jacob seized the moment. While all eyes were on the men in the loft, he moved. He wasn't a brawler, he was a tactician. He threw the heavy ledger with all his might, not at Wendell, but at Sheriff Rawlings. The book struck the sheriff squarely in the face, stunning him for a crucial second. In that same motion, Jacob lunged forward, grabbing the barrel of the shotgun and twisting it away. One of Wendell's hired guns drew his pistol, but before he could aim, a rock, thrown with surprising force by Inez, hit him in the hand, making him cry out and drop the weapon. The scene exploded into chaos. The ranch hands in the loft fired a warning shot into the air, and Wendell's men, realizing they were outgunned and exposed, hesitated. They were hired muscle, not loyal soldiers willing to die for Wendell Claude. Wendell himself, his face pale with terror, made a run for the horses. But Jacob, having wrestled the shotgun from Rawlings' grip, leveled it at the fleeing man. "It's over, Wendell," Jacob yelled. "There's nowhere left to run." Wendell stopped, his hands slowly rising in the air. His empire, built on lies and intimidation, had crumbled in the Montana dust. Mr. Thorne, the slick businessman, stood frozen, his face a picture of pure astonishment. And Sheriff Rawlings, his nose bleeding from the impact of the ledger, looked from the armed ranchers to the determined faces of the Whitmore sisters, and finally down at the incriminating book lying open at his feet. He knew in that instant that his career, his power, everything he had built on a foundation of quiet corruption, was finished. The standoff ended not with a bang, but with the quiet clicks of handcuffs. Otis Wayne and his men rounded up Wendell and his thugs, while Jacob kept the shotgun trained on a defeated Sheriff Rawlings. The arrival of the county's deputy, a young, honest man who had long suspected his boss was crooked, sealed their fate. The ledger told the whole story. It was all there in Silas Croft's meticulous handwriting. It not only detailed Wendell's financial crimes, but also included a sworn statement from Silas, written just days before his death, describing Wendell's threats and predicting his own murder. It was enough to clear Jacob's name completely and ensure that Wendell Claude would trade his mansion in San Francisco for a federal prison cell for a very long time. Sheriff Rawlings was stripped of his badge and arrested for corruption and conspiracy. The town of Copper Creek, shocked by the revelations, rallied around the Whitmore sisters. A sense of justice, clean and bright as the Montana sky, settled over the valley. In the days that followed, the farm was a hive of activity. Neighbors came from miles around, bringing food, supplies, and willing hands. The barn, which had been a symbol of defiance, now became a symbol of community. It rose quickly, stronger and better than the original. One evening as the sun set, casting long shadows across the nearly completed structure, Edith found Jacob standing by the fence, looking out at the land. His few possessions were packed in his worn canvas bag at his feet. Otis Wayne offered me a job again, he said quietly. Foreman on his ranch. Good pay. A real future. Edith's heart sank. He was leaving. He had his name back, his freedom. There was nothing tying him here anymore. You should take it, she said, trying to keep her voice even. You deserve it. He turned to face her, and the slow smile that touched his lips was worth more than all the gold in California. I do deserve it, he agreed. But I told him I already had a job, finishing what I started here, if you'll still have me. He took a step closer. This land, this farm, it feels more like home than any place I've ever been. And the people here, his eyes met hers. One person in particular, she feels more like home than anyone I've ever known. Tears welled in Edith's eyes, but they were tears of joy. The heart she thought had been broken by Wendell, the heart she thought had been frozen by grief, was full. It had been learning a new kind of love, not the frantic, breathless passion of a young girl's dream, but something deeper, stronger, something built on shared struggle, mutual respect, and quiet courage. I was thinking, she said softly, that this farm is too much for two sisters to run alone. We might need a partner. A partner? He asked, his smile widening. For forever? She whispered. He closed the space between them, his hand gently touching her cheek. Forever, he promised. And this time, Edith Lorraine Whitmore knew she could believe in forever again, because she had learned that sometimes the greatest storms don't come to destroy you. They come to clear the path, to wash away the lies, and to show you what is truly strong enough to stand when everything else has been torn away. The biggest twists in life aren't the ones that knock you down. They're the ones that help you stand up and see who you were meant to be all along. If you enjoyed this story and you believe in the power of resilience and second chances, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the story we have coming for you next.